The Mount Washington Valley Economic Council, we welcome you all. I think we're going to have a very interesting panel this morning. But first I have a little business to take care of. I want to thank the sponsors of the Economic Council. The first is New Hampshire Electric Cooperative, who has been our sponsor now for several years, our gold sponsor. Our diamond sponsors are Bank of New Hampshire, HEB, and Drive. Many of you knew it under another name, but it's our public relations publicity firm in town. HEB is also our business sponsor, so I want to give them a double thanks. Thank you, Liz. Because as you know, many folks can't make any particular hour based on the businesses in the valley, so it's very useful to be able to show it on our local cable access station 6 times, and so HEB is funding that for us. It's really fun looking at this audience, and I've commented on this to a couple of folks, but I see my history here in the Valley because Dick sold me my first house, Gail hired me to teach for Granite State College, and George and I worked together 30 years ago?
We didn't actually work together.
No, we worked for the same agency. And this audience also bears out the projections being done by the New Hampshire Center for Public Policy in that we're maturing very nicely as a group. So without further ado, I've asked Carmen to serve as our chair, our informal chair, and we're going to hear from 2 local experts and 1 regional expert as to what's going to happen to our economy. There you go.
Well, thanks. Good morning, everybody. My name's Carmen Lorenz, and I'm the director at the New Hampshire Division of Economic Development. And I'm joined here by Alan Gould from TD Bank and Dan Jones on the end. So we actually thought we would just go down the line, and we're each going to talk for about the same amount of time, but we all agreed that we'd love to hear your questions as they pop into your mind. So please just raise your hand if you have a question about something, and we'll just do the Q&A as we go so we can have an engaging discussion. So I look forward to hearing what you both have to say and sharing some information that I hope you find interesting as well. So we'll start with you, Dan.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Dan Jones. I'm a real estate broker in North Conway. I've been doing so for 41 years. My mentor is in the front row overseeing what I'm doing once again. So I will expect questions from Dick. When I moved to the Valley in 1972, I recall a typical conversation in a restaurant would be between a customer and a waiter or waitress. Hi, I'm Dan. I graduated from Tufts with a bachelor's degree and Boston College with a master's, and I recommend the chicken Florentine, which was typical because so many of the people in the Valley were over-educated and underemployed. Since that time, much has changed and much has not. The Valley, the Strip has obviously changed dramatically. Back when I first came, they had just gotten the first franchise with McDonald's, and since that time, it's grown obviously exponentially at least between the Howard Johnsons and the Eastern Slopes Inn. But we're still an economy driven by hospitality, starting in the 80s by retail and the related support businesses. And I took nothing more than going to the flashing light in Center Conway, trying to get on Route 302, to see the impact that has had in the Valley, and that the traffic jam that's been created now with people coming over from Maine to be working in Mount Washington Valley is significant. We wait in line sometimes 10 minutes to get onto 302, and then the same at nighttime coming back. So that clearly are people who are employed in the Valley. What happens typically is that because of the type of economy we have, which is all tourist related, or primarily tourist related, the income levels in town are suppressed, and that a lot of people have difficulty finding housing because of it. In addition of the second home market, which is a big part of our economy up here, has also forced prices up for housing and prices up for rental demand, and consequently a lot of people are priced out of the market. In a study that was done by the housing cooperative that Teresa Kennett was heading up, there's a great online site to get the manual on that. It talks about the average income. 56% of the population of the Valley has an income below $50,000. And at that time, they were saying $50,000 would potentially allow somebody to afford a $190,000 house. I can tell you today, it does not. It's significantly below that. So a lot of people are priced out of the market. So I think to know where we're going, it's helpful to look back historically as to where we've been. I kind of begin my time frame in 1974, and I Googled how many recessions I've lived through because I've lost track. But some of them were relatively insignificant, at least to me. The oil shock recession of 74, 75, I had just started. I had no clue what to compare it with, so as far as I was concerned, that was the market. Interest rates at that time were 9.96%. Statistically, it says it lasted for 2 years' time. The Volcker recession of 1981 and 82 is one I'm more familiar with because I had just, at that time, left Dick to start my own company, and immediately interest rates went up to over 18%. I think Dick kind of planned that, but that's, in any event, anyone who was buying or selling a home at that time, or anybody who was brokering homes or in the loan business, clearly saw the impact of that recession. The next big recession was a recession of 1990 and 91, which was what I would call the first Great Recession that I experienced. And interestingly, in the article I read, it said 1990 to 91. Mount Washington Valley, recessions have lasted longer, and the recovery from recessions have taken longer than in other parts of New England. And a lot of reasons for that, but our recession at that time really began in 1988 from a real estate perspective, and it really didn't start recovering until 1996. Then there was a brief recession after the 9/11 disaster, but the next Great Recession, again, is listed as 2008 to 2009. I will tell you that our recession really started showing up in 2007, and arguably it bottomed out in 2012, and it has basically stayed there since that time. And there are good indications that that is changing, but I'll address that in a minute. Interest rates in January of 2013 hit a low of 3.29%. There are other products out there where you can get lower rates, but they typically were 15-year, or they may have been an adjustable rate mortgage. So I wanted to give you a couple hard examples of, and I actually did 4, but I'll reduce them to 2 because of the timing. But properties that sold in 2006 at the interest rates at that time, and properties, either identical properties or similar properties that have sold since that time, and since that time being in the last 6 months' time. First one I'd use would be probably Rocky River condominiums. Prime example, and again, condominiums will necessarily be a little different than single-family homes because you are dealing primarily with a second home market. So it might not be completely identical to what the other market would indicate. But overall, prices fell in Mount Washington Valley by an average of about 30%. So in the example for Rocky River, a condominium that sold $225,000 back in 2006. Interest rates then were 6.65%. Today, the argument I will use is about 4%. It's a little above that right now, but very close. So the condominium sold for $225,000. On a 30-year fixed rate mortgage, it would require 20% down, $45,000. It would yield a monthly payment back then of $1,156. Today, same condominium, same complex, sold for $155,000. That's $70,000 less. 30% approximately less than it was in 2006. At today's interest rates, mortgage payment of $592, almost half of what it cost back then. And I think this is an important point because the affordability of housing today is the best I have seen probably since I've been in business. We have rolled prices back to 2002 levels, and that's at 2002 interest, which was again over 6%. If you factor in the interest rates today compared to that, you go back farther, and I couldn't calculate back that far. The second example is a primary home in North Conway. It's a ranch-style home in Birch Hill. It happened to be the identical home that sold in 2005 for $237,000. It would have required $47,400 in down payment and a mortgage payment of about $1,200 a month. Same home sold in December of last year, $161,000, $32,200 down payment, which would have been $15,200 less than back in 2006, and a mortgage payment of $615, or almost exactly half of what it cost in 2006. Pricing today, as always, is driven by supply and demand. I did not do well in economics in college, but one thing I did learn and understand was the forces of supply and demand. And you see that so clearly in the Valley. When demand is up like it was back in 1987, everyone was buying. There were fewer and fewer products to sell, and prices went up. Conversely, through the last 8 to 10 years' time, there's been an abundance of properties on the market for varying reasons, and there have been a lot fewer buyers out there, partly because of affordability, nervousness, primarily nervousness about the markets. And I think that people are just starting to understand now what an ideal time it is to buy real estate. What are the guidelines of the people who are buying right now? We're seeing a lot of the baby boomers, my generation, who started retiring back in 3-4 years ago. Many were buying even 10 years ago in planning for the future, realizing they wanted a vacation home, but they bought something more substantial because they want to retire up here. Maybe buy a place here, a place in Florida, place on the coast of Maine, but that has become a very significant part of our business. There are the tweeners, which again, I was an example of that. I was raising a family, but my parents were aging out in Minnesota, and so we flew them out. They bought a home in the Valley. There's a lot of people that are coming to the Valley to be closer to their children. We are also losing people because of that. There are families that have come to us and said we need to sell because we want to be down close to our grandkids, and they're in Georgia or wherever. We have an aging population. Linda and I were talking about this earlier. The Valley has got an aging population. The mean age, which I guess means half the age is below, half above, is 48.1. That was in 2010. The U.S. average is 37.2. So we have an older population in the Valley. We also have older than the average in New Hampshire as well. Our population up here grew by 30% from 1990 to 2010. That was significantly better than the state of New Hampshire. So we're attracting people regardless. I want to touch on the impact of taxes on value. Back in the 1980s, when the big condominium boom hit Mount Washington Valley, the primary effect of that boom was that a lot of people were developing condominiums in the town of Bartlett. Why? Because taxes were lower in the town of Bartlett. It was a self-fulfilling effort because as they sold to more vacation home people, the demands on the schools didn't change. They weren't bringing in families to further burden the schools and cause expansion of schools and so on. They ended up, second home owners up here really support our economy so much, and they support the school systems because they don't have kids. They have the same services, they have the same fire protection and police protection, but they're not adding children to the system. I think that the Valley should be opening a red carpet to all second home buyers up here because it does help taxes. Town of Conway has not had as many of those complexes, especially more recently, and consequently the taxes in Conway are higher than they are in many of the surrounding towns. But conversely, and the argument that I think Dick and I would use in our business is that prices are lower in the town of Conway, in the town of Madison, in a lot of the towns that have a higher tax structure, and therefore you get more bang for your buck. So taxes are not static, they can change, but if you can buy a lot more house for the money, a lot of people find that appealing as well. How am I doing on time?
You're doing well. You got about 5 minutes.
Good, okay. I ran through my own personal activity in the last year's time, in 2014, just to see who these people were that I was selling to. I think probably you'll find this is fairly indicative of Dick's office and other offices in town. I had 12 primary home buyers last year. 2 of them were first-time buyers. 3 of them were upgrades, where they had a home in town already and they were buying a more expensive home or a smaller home. You can go in any number of directions. Only 1 was leaving the Valley for employment reasons, which I found interesting. And then 6 of them were brand new to Mount Washington Valley. They were people moving in for employment opportunities primarily. I think 1 or 2 may have been retiring. There were a total of 12 vacation home buyers, of which 1 was vacation or retirement, buying one of those homes that they plan to vacation in but retire into. And 12 were straight vacation or investment vacation. A lot of the profile of a lot of buyers today are that they will use the property some of the time and rent it out some of the time. It helps to defray expenses, and a lot of folks find that very appealing. And then 6 of those 12 were condominiums. So the other 6 were either chalet style, cottages, or in some cases more substantial homes. And then there were 5 lot sales, 3 of which were primary home purchases where they're going to build a primary home, and 2 were for building vacation homes. I think that's a pretty good cross-section of what other firms were experiencing as well. I wanted to touch quickly on what housing does to the local economy, because I think this is really important. The housing sales are a stimulus to the economy, a tremendous stimulus. A sale will trigger the following. For a vacation person, they're going to come up, pay for gas, pay for lodging, pay for food in restaurants while they're looking. And then once, either primary home or vacation home, once they're buying, they have a contract, they make a loan application with TD Bank North. And they end up, the costs associated with that, it helps employ people locally at the bank. Then there's home inspections. A home inspector is going to be $300 or $400 anyway. So a home inspector locally has new money in their pocket. Sometimes repairs are required, so you have service industries coming in to help repair the property, whatever's found. An appraisal is done. An appraisal can be typically $300, $400. Again, an appraiser is being paid and adds money to the economy. You have a title company that does a title search and handles the closing process that supports those people who are employed by the title company. Then once you have a closing, typically people are going to go out and they'll put new flooring in. They'll get new carpet, they'll get tile, they'll go to a local company for that. They need paint, oftentimes they'll repaint because they don't like the color, because it needs to be painted. They'll buy furniture, or maybe they go to Habitat to their big furniture sale and support a local nonprofit. Many will have a moving company hired to be able to move furniture in or out of the home that they're buying. Landscaping, if you're buying a single family home, sometimes they'll end up at McSherry's or one of the stores in town to buy landscaping material. And then finally, brokers have to get paid too, so brokerage fees. And as all this comes in, then when I have a better income, I'm more likely to go out and buy a car and to go out to eat more often and maybe to buy a new sports coat, which I need. Second home ownership is great because it has no loads on the school system. They require minimal services, but they do end up competing and forcing the housing market higher in price, making it more difficult for local people, especially in the lower brackets, to be able to afford to buy. So somewhere here, outlook. That's what you came for, to hear. Okay, the market's down by 30%. Interest rates are historically low right now. The Fed said yesterday, yeah, they're going to have a little uptick this year, but they emphasized minor, and they said this looks like a longer-term situation where they're going to raise rates slowly. That's all good news. New home sales, I think this is a real good indication. In the first 5.5 months of this year, in Mount Washington Valley, and I went down to Freedom, and up to Jackson, including Hart's location, Hale's location, and so on. There were 158 homes sold this year so far. 2/3 of those were in the northern tier, so I pulled out Freedom, Tamworth, and Ossipee. So in what I would call more Mount Washington Valley, 2/3 were sold in that area. There were 72 condominium sales. Those are primarily up here. All but 2 of those were in Mount Washington Valley. The interesting part is pending sales as of right now, as of yesterday. There are 107 pending sales, 2/3 of which again are in the northern part of Carroll County. And there are 33 condominiums pending sale. And almost all of those are up here. I think all but 2 are up here. I think that's a real interesting indication of where we're going right now, because we did a whole total of 158 in almost 6 months' time. And you have 107 homes and 33 condominiums right now, which really would indicate about 2 months of inventory. The activity level, and once again, Dick, I'm sure we agree with this, the activity level has increased dramatically. Part of that is seasonal, but I also think part of it is a reality. People are understanding this is not going to last forever, and you better get your foot in the door. So if people who are just buying and selling locally or buying and selling in a similar economy, if you're selling today, you're going to be selling in a buyer's market for the time being. But if you're turning around and buying, you're buying in a buyer's market. So I just tell people you're swapping equity. You're taking equity out of one investment, putting it into another. The same is true on the flip side. Once we get into a seller's market, which I think we still shall, it's easy to become myopic in our business, and I went through this in the 80s and really felt that Mount Washington Valley may not come out of this thing. We may just be stuck as a bread and butter community. That changed. In 2006, everything changed. I found myself feeling the same way in about 2010, 2011. But things are clearly changing, and my optimism has increased dramatically. Questions?
You covered it very well.
Good. Thank you. That means a lot.
We got one in the back there.
Yes, sir.
Dan, I believe in Madison there are 100 homes for sale, not new homes. And that's a big uptick in the last year and a half. Any sense of why so much resale?
I think overall inventory has increased a lot in the last couple of years' time. Someone asked me one time, because on 113 there were like 7 or 8 homes in a 1 mile stretch that were for sale, and I went and checked on each one of those, and each one was for a different reason. One was a divorce situation, another one was because they're moving out of the area, another one was I can't recall now, but I mean there were different reasons. One was a lakefront home. The person had bought another lakefront home and were trying to sell the first one. And again, as Dick will confirm the same way, that pricing is key. Everything is based on pricing. People ask me, how quickly will my home sell? Your home will sell as quickly as you want to price it accurately. And a lot of people don't want to listen to that. That's human nature. I don't want to listen to it. I don't know. But it is so true. If you price a property correctly, it will sell. Your inventory in Madison could be gone overnight if people price correctly. But you need to be aggressive on pricing.
I think another part of that problem is taxation.
Is which?
Taxation.
Taxation, sure.
Particularly of those units that are for sale and otherwise, you've got an overload of taxes. The otherwise increasing, and that impacts the demand for housing.
Sure.
Wait, another question?
Yes.
Dan, the numbers you mentioned for this year, how do they compare to last year?
The sales numbers for the first 5.5 months were almost identical, very close. The pending sales is where it has changed. That's where we're seeing a greater increase. I just researched that this morning, as a matter of fact. I can't tell you the exact figure, but it's definitely higher than it was a year ago. And again, I see, if people fully understood the stats that I gave you comparing the condominium and the home that sold 6 years ago, they realize this is just an unbelievable time to buy. It's a great time. So when that word gets out, and I recall back in the 80s that for a while we thought we had too much inventory, and there's not enough buyers coming up, and in a matter of like 30 days we were complaining on the opposite side, saying we haven't got enough inventory. It can change that rapidly, and I do believe, I think with what we're seeing, and it's in all price ranges, seeing sales that are happening anywhere. I pulled out stats that showed the somewhere here the ranges in pricing. And this is in the sales so far this year. There were 16 below 100,000, 74 between 100 and 200, 41 between 2 and 300. So that was the biggest area. But then over $300,000, there were still 21, almost 30 transactions over 300,000. A couple just shy of $1 million. That's a sign that people are looking to spend money in this valley.
Great. Well, we'll move on to Alan now. Thank you very much, Dan. That was very interesting.
All right, so I'm going to try to supplement the realtor's viewpoint to a lender's viewpoint, because basically as a commercial lender, I get the opportunity to look at financial statements year over year, tax returns, and I can see the trends and basically the condition of different companies. So Dan spoke of a couple of the recessions that we've cycled through, more specifically the 2008 recession. I can tell you that between 2008, 09, and 10, I saw a lot of financial statements. The revenues just fall off the cliff. And I think there isn't an industry that wasn't affected by the 2008 recession. I think it was pretty much across the board. Now, fast forward to 2013 and 14, the statements I'm looking at now, I see a lot of improvements, again, across the board, some greater than others, but certainly there's an uptick in revenue and cash flow made by these by same customers. So I think that's certainly a big thing. And I think some of the other indicators maybe kind of ties in with what Dan said, is that, you know, right now we've got low inflation, we've got low fuel costs, we have you know, certainly a stronger dollar, and all three of those indicators will create an increased disposable income. And I think case in point would be just I think it was this week I saw an article in the Conway Daily Sun that spoke of this past ski season as being a record skier visit. And you know, of course, a lot of snow down in Boston helps too. But I think the combination of you know, some strong conditions, you know, positive ski conditions rather, and an increase in disposable income has kind of given this uptick. I think certainly it helped to. I think we got a nice snow dump, I think the Thursday before February break. So you know, again, so this impacts all of the hospitality of the restaurants in the Valley. So I think the first half of this year has been pretty strong for the Valley. The other thing to note as far as an indicator is that my market covers all the way down to Rochester and over to the Lakes region. So I'm outside of the Mount Washington Valley, Rochester being somewhat on the northern end of the seacoast. And as Dan alluded, you know, we're in this economy up here. We're pretty much the first to fall, last to recover, and it's historically been that way for a long time. I'm sure Dick can confirm that. But what I see down in Rochester right now is that's where a lot of my activity is. So that's telling me that, you know, the ripple in the pond is working its way this way. Probably won't happen as quickly as we want, and I couldn't tell you when it's going to happen, but it's certainly an indicator that that the economy is improving in southern New Hampshire. I think locally, what I've seen as far as loan demand, and first off, back in 2009, as a commercial lender, I had so much difficulty trying to find someone to lend money to. I mean, the loan demand was anemic. There was, you know, picture yourself owning a company and you just did not want to go further out on that limb, borrow more money. You just didn't do that back in 2008 and 9. Today I see an increase in loan volume, certainly. What's interesting though, I see a lot of an increase in startup requests and acquisitions. I think Dan alluded to the baby boomer. You know, if you own a company and you're 60, 62 years old, you don't have a family succession in place, you're going to want to sell your company. And so I think, you know, I've seen the kind of an uptick in the exchange of ownership of companies, which I think is a good thing. Startups, I mean, it takes a lot of guts to start your own company. And so I see that increase in activity as kind of an indicator that consumer confidence is up. So again, I mean, it takes a lot of planning to start your own company. And the financing requests I've seen have increased. Let's see, Jack Cuddy asked me to say a couple of things about bank policy and how it controls what I can lend for. Every bank has a policy. It's basically my rule book as to what I can and cannot do. And after 2008, industry-wide, there are a lot of banks adjusted their policy accordingly because of what the recession that was pretty impactful. I think TD Bank as a whole has been relatively conservative, so our core policy didn't change, but certainly focus on different industries of higher risk. Those were made adjustments. And of course, then all the bank regulations that came into play afterwards impacted what a bank or how much availability of money that bank could lend. You know, the Dodd-Frank Act and the Basel Accords have increased capital requirements for the banks, and it just limits how much money we can lend. So that again will impact the economy. Dan talked a little bit about the rates. So yesterday at 2:30, the Fed had an announcement to maintain the Fed rate where it is right now, which is 0 to 0.25. The Fed rate is what the Federal Reserve will charge banks for overnight money, And so what happens is the Fed rate is set, and then that trickles out to the prime rate. So the prime dropped down to 3.25 in mid-December 2008. It's been there ever since. It's kind of flatlined. Prior to 2008, if you had asked me, I would have told you that rate cycles are about a 7-year cycle. Of course, I can't say that anymore because we've been on the bottom, just bouncing along for 7 years now. The economists at TD Bank call for their forecast is the Fed rate to go up to 0.75 by the end of this year, and up to 1.25 by the end of 2016. That was their forecast prior to yesterday's announcement. Whether they may adjust it, I'm not sure. For those interested, TD.com is the website. You can go right to it. Anybody can go to it. And there's a tab for the economy, so you can go and read. The economist's a lot smarter than I am to talk about both the Canadian and the U.S. markets, and both historical and forecasts. Let's see. Dan covered a lot of things I was going to cover. So
I was glad to go first.
Stole your thunder.
So
Jeez.
it's all right though. It's all right. I just for fun, I printed out some historical interest rates because I have the from 1972 to current for the 30-year mortgage fixed rate conventional rates, and I asked Dan what he thought was the highest year of where it peaked, and he missed it by 1 year. So Dick, what year was the highest? Where did it all cap out?
I wouldn't make a guess on that. I wouldn't borrow money at that point.
Well, and you're wise.
Couldn't.
Yeah, the mortgage. These are mortgage rates now. These are long-term rates versus prime. But 1981 was 16.63 was the nation's average mortgage rate. I think I bought my home right in 1984 is when I bought, and I think I refinanced my home about 3 times in the 3 years I owned that house. I don't think I saved any money, but it felt good to get down off of 12% for a mortgage rate.
It did go as high as, in places as high as 21%.
For a mortgage?
Yeah.
Yeah, the prime tapped out at 20% back in 1980, which if you're a small business with a line of credit with a variable rate, and you're talk about rate risk at 20%, and that's at prime. Prime by definition is the best rate, the lowest rate rather that a bank will charge its best customers. So if you're a prime plus 2 and the prime is at 20%, it's all relative, right? So right now it's prime is at 3.25, and I don't see it going up until maybe between now and the end of the year.
Does anyone have any questions for Alan? I had one actually. You mentioned that you're seeing, in terms of the commercial loan requests, you're seeing startups and acquisitions, that kind of activity picking up. Are there any particular types of businesses that seems to be concentrated in?
Mostly service-based, I think, but there's and then there's one manufacturer down in the Rochester market. And then as far as the acquisitions go, I mean, that's been across the board, and covering a lot of different sectors. And again, I see it pretty much driven by the demographics of the baby boomers. I mean, if you don't have family succession in place and you're looking to sell.
An interesting point.
Go ahead.
Interesting point that really wasn't touched on was that there's been a strong uptick in mortgages or residential mortgages, cash buyers. Very high. When you get above a certain price level, it can be 40-60% of the market going for cash.
He's talking about an uptick in cash buyers.
Cash buyers,
Homes.
yeah.
Yeah, we can't hear back here.
Sorry about that.
No, there's definitely part of the market, the recovery of the market, particularly in the high-end properties, is cash buyers. They can't make anything in the stock market. They can't make anything in the bond market. And they're taking money out of their retirement funds, particularly those that are planning to retire here. primary, maybe not primary today, but primary tomorrow homes, and they're putting cash into it.
Any question over here?
Alan, can you tell us the criteria difference between, let's say, a retail expansion and one of these new startups? Because as you know, the Economic Council is about trying to help diversify our economy. How do the criteria change in those two situations?
Well, if you have historical data from, so you were comparing an existing company with a pure startup,
And
right?
particularly, I'm talking retail or recreation business
Okay.
versus a startup.
Well, the existing company will have some historical data, right? They've got some sales trends that they can show, whereas a startup is just numbers on a
Whatever
piece of
they
paper.
guess.
And so the cash component of cash equity going into the deal is going to be higher for the startup, right? So you can't be a startup and expect 100% financing from a bank, right? I mean, that's, you know, so if you have, so that's the basic difference is the risk issue, whereas a startup is higher in risk, so larger cash from the owner is going to have to come into play. And yes, you mentioned the Economic Council. The last few startups I've done, pretty much all the startups I've done in the last year and a half, I've used the Economic Council. There's a WEDCO down in Wolfboro area that is analogous to, same counterpart as Jack here at the Economic Council. And I've used both agencies extensively, actually. Jack needs more money because I've used it. I haven't done a startup without involving an Economic Council. It's a great source for me because basically at the end of the day, I can get the loan done, I can lower the bank's exposure by lending less, essentially, and using an agency that's here just to develop the economy, which is the intent. So, it's funny, to Dick's point, in 2009 and 10 and 11, sometimes the bigger competitors that I had were people with cash. I lost out on deals where I had a proposal, it was an approved loan, and either the seller came in and financed it or a third party came in and financed it. So for the first time, my competitors weren't another bank, it was somebody with cash, sidelined, not earning anything in the stock market, so they felt strong enough for that one individual company to invest in, and so, I lost out on a deal. So that's one different thing. It hasn't happened recently, but back in 2009 and 10 it did.
Any other questions?
Does your bank's rule book get edited based on the demographic projections as to what businesses are more likely to flourish?
Absolutely. Every commercial loan that gets booked has a 6-digit industry code to it. And so every bank has the data mining that goes on that says, in these industries, delinquency and default ratios are higher than in this particular industry, and banks lend accordingly. So absolutely.
Anyone else? Okay. Thank you very much. That was interesting. I'm going to go next here, and it was really great to have you guys go first because it sort of made me feel better about some of my slides and worse about others, but it was really helpful, so I appreciate that. First, I just wanted to, before we get started, and I was talking about this before we get started, but I just wanted to real quickly talk a little bit about what our division does, because economic development is such a broad term, and it means very different things to different people. So I did give everybody a copy of our economic review that we did, and you can, pages 2 and 3 on right at the beginning there, gives an overview of all of the different programs and what we did last year with each of those programs. And I would just highlight that we do out-of-state business attraction. That's one of our functions. We have, for the past 4.5 years or so, we've been really limited in what we could do because we've got 2 recruiters that work on that. In addition, Beano helps with out-of-state business recruitment up in Canada, but they haven't had any travel funding to go out of state. And we have a pretty small marketing budget, so I mean, quite frankly, we haven't had a huge presence when it comes to marketing the state of New Hampshire as a business location. We're excited because going forward in the budget so far, knock wood, it will stay in there through the conference committee process. We do have funding for out-of-state travel, so I think our out-of-state business recruitment efforts will be bolstered quite a bit. And we're also, I'll talk about some new tools that we're deploying at the end of my presentation that will also support out-of-state business recruitment and hopefully help folks here in the Mount Washington Valley with some of the work that you do locally. And then really the rest of the programs on the list are all focused on retaining companies that we have in New Hampshire and helping them grow. So by and large, the vast majority of our budget is dedicated to business retention. That is the bread and butter of what we do. Exporting, government contracting, job training grants, those are all tools that can be very helpful and impactful. They're all designed for small companies. So I encourage you to read about those programs here in our annual report. And please talk about those programs to folks that you do business with, because I can honestly say, I don't think we've done a job training grant here in quite a while, and it's something that even for service sector companies, real estate, for any type of company can access the job training grant. It's if you have a worker that maybe you want to promote them to a management position, but they need some training, you can access this grant, and it would pay for half of that cost. So it can be something very small, as little as $750, all the way up to a very comprehensive training program that you can apply for up to $100,000. So it's really versatile, and we could certainly use your help to make sure that people here in the Valley know about that program and try and take advantage of it. So next, so what I'm going to actually talk about, this is kind of good timing, and I was excited. I was talking to Jack last week about some of this information. We are working on a strategic plan for the division. So it's not a comprehensive statewide economic development plan. We don't have the resources to do that. I mean, that requires a lot of public input all around the state. We're trying to move in that direction, and there's a lot of great work that's already been done in that regard, but I just want to make sure you understand that what the plan that we're working on is to help guide the programs that we have and make sure that we're targeting our outreach to the right industries, and thinking about other types of programming that we maybe could create to support New Hampshire's economy. So as part of that process, what we did, we're trying to define the state's key industries, and so we did a regional scan of the state, and we have a really cool data tool that we're using now that makes that process really easy for us. But we can look on a regional level, and we can immediately see which industries seem to be very highly concentrated in the different regions of the state compared to the national average, which is an indication that that's an economic strength of that region. And then you can also see what's happening. Is that industry growing? Is it contracting? So that tells you this is an important industry, and if it's projected to decline over the next 5 years, maybe we should dig into that and see if there's something we can do to reverse that trend or support it. Because again, projections are, what happens if we don't do anything to try and intervene. And so I'm just going to show you the information that we pulled out for the Mount Washington region. It's not exactly the same region as Mount Washington Valley Economic Council, but this is what we did for our strategic plan. So I'm really curious to actually hear some feedback from you on it, because we don't have the ability to do a lot of public input, like I said, for this particular document. So it's nice to get a reality check. And like I said, some of what I'm going to show you, I think, made a lot of sense in the context of what you were both talking about. One difference, obviously, I mean, the region that we use the White Mountains, so it's not exactly the Mount Washington Valley. We don't have access to data for Maine, so we couldn't basically do the labor shed for this area that you all spend a lot of your time thinking about and working on. But in the White Mountains region, we've got about 35,000 jobs. The average earnings about $47,000, and that is significantly lower than the state average. Just to flag that. But one thing.
Just to ask a question.
Yeah.
Does that include Hanover?
No. So that's in the Dartmouth Lake Sun. This is basically like, this is Plymouth, so it does include Plymouth. But but it doesn't include the
So it's
Hanover.
for Littleton and
Yep,
North Side.
yep. Littleton's like the northernmost on this
Okay.
side, so, yeah. Thank you, that's a good point of clarification. But one thing I noticed, the projected growth is actually higher than what's projected for the state, and I thought that was kind of interesting, but I think a lot of the pickup in the real estate market perhaps that you're seeing here could be contributing to that. So this is just kind of a global level on what, again, this is what we're pulling out of the data source that we have, but it's always a good idea to reality check that against local knowledge, because these data sources, they're not always perfect, and I've seen lots of weird things come out of them sometimes. So, and then I'm just going to go through, I think there's 6 or so key industries that kind of popped up for us when we were doing this regional scan, and clearly this is one that everyone's very familiar with, tourism industry, and you can just kind of see, compared to sort of the national average, it's 217% more concentrated than just the national average economy. So very highly tourism as a strength. And then the projected growth, over the next 5 years, so that's for the total 5-year period, not per year, is just under 4%. So it's growing a little bit more slowly than at the national level, but you already have a lot more employees in this cluster. And then the average earnings was significantly lower, and I think that may have something to do with seasonality, but I'm not exactly sure why there's such a big difference there, but that was something that popped out to me. This does not include restaurants, that's in a separate cluster, but again, all of the other types of businesses that service visitors. So food and beverage, this one, it was interesting to me because the state of New Hampshire, if you look at the whole state, it's like 20% below the national concentration for food and beverage cluster. But here, you were the only region in the whole state that was actually higher than the national average. I thought that was interesting. And again, it's growing a little bit more slowly than at the national level, but you already have a little bit more. So average earnings are not much lower than the national level when it comes to food. And again, we're talking about farms, breweries, specialty foods, in addition to restaurants and bars. So it includes food production as well as the serving of food and drink. Forest and wood products is another one that, traditionally an important cluster here. And this, just want to call out, this is a cluster that when our data source makes the clusters, they're pulling together industries at the most detailed level that you can. So it's called the National North American Industrial Classification System. So they all have a 6-digit code that Alan referenced, that every company that they do business with has a code assigned to it, so you can tell what specific industry it's in. They're pulling together businesses that utilize similar types of labor and occupations, that have similar supply chain connections, and do similar types of work. So I just included like some of the ones that had the most employment numbers in it in this region. So that does include things that would come under home repairs, home construction, contractors of all types fall under this, finish carpentry, furniture manufacturing. So it's not just logging, which is what you might typically think of when you think of forestry. It's anything that has to do with wood products. So here, this is kind of interesting though. Why is it projected to decline by so much? And that probably would have to do, I think, sawmills and logging, where I think those are actually the 2 highest ones, and that's probably why. I think if I took a little bit of time to look at what's going on with these, we'd probably see those actually going up a little bit based on what we know. So just a caveat there. And again, average earnings are lower than at the national level. For what reason, I don't know exactly, but this is what the data is telling us. And then the next 3 were kind of, sort of, I wouldn't say, it was, when I was looking at the information, it wasn't necessarily what one would expect or necessarily think about in the White Mountains region. And some of this might not be on this side of the White Mountains region, but I did just want to include it because I thought it was interesting. I think this is actually, there's like a company in Rumney, I think that's what this is, that does electric cables. So, maybe, I don't know if you've been over to visit them, but I think that's why this one is so high. And there might be some other smaller companies there, but I think the bulk of them were in that one company. But again, it was kind of interesting. It wasn't one that I necessarily would have thought. Another one, machinery manufacturing. This one, pretty high concentration, and this includes, machine tool, any type of company that makes industrial machine or commercial machinery. And here, this one's very interesting to me. I mean, it's pretty small, and you've got 35,000 jobs in this whole region. This is only about 500 jobs that we're talking about, but the growth was actually, opposite of what's going on at the national level, where it's contracting. Here we're seeing some growth over the next 5 years, and the average earnings are much higher than at the national level. So this was very interesting to me because I felt like there's definitely something going on here that's worth looking into, and maybe identifying all the companies that fall under this and learning a little bit more about what's going on with them and what their needs might be. So maybe we can help make this number higher over the next 5 years. The earnings are fantastic, so it seems like a good opportunity. And then another one, primary metal manufacturing. Again, this is pretty small, but it was a significant concentration that we saw. Looks like it's declining more quickly than at the national level. And this is really foundries. So the data source, sometimes you can find names of companies that are in this category. This one, I couldn't find any names. So that just means they weren't able to pull it. Doesn't mean that they're not here necessarily. But again, I've seen some funny stuff come out of this program. So it's always good to kind of hear what local people have to say about it. And then another one that I wanted to talk about that it didn't pop up, sort of what we were looking for when we did our scan was what's going on, what industries are really concentrated compared to the national level. So business and financial services didn't pop up when we did that scan because in this region it was actually lower than at the national level, but it occurred to me as I was driving up here that the growth was actually quite high. It was like, I want to say it was like over 10% growth over the next 5-year period. And so I wonder if that's also, any type of professional or technical services would fall under that, as well as banking. So that might again be being driven by some of the housing market trends that you talked about. I was able to pull out a list of the 20 fastest growing occupations in the region over the next 5 years. So I'm sorry that it's very small, but and this is kind of interesting to me. And I went to this conference in April that was put on by the Federal Department of Labor, and we were talking about how to build industry partnerships around industries where there's growth to make sure that they have the workforce that they need. And the guy put a slide up, and he wasn't focused on I was looking at the earnings part of the chart, and he didn't really focus on that at all, but he was just talking about, oh, look at, there's like all this growth in this and in that, and he had the top 10 that were up there. And the thing that jumped out to me was all of them were below the median salary for the United States. So, I know that that's a concern here, and because you do have a very high concentration of tourism and other service industries, that sort of that living wage issue and housing affordability is something that's, a pressing concern for you. I live in the Lakes region, and we talk about some of the same things there for similar reasons. But it's really a national trend that we're seeing a lot of the fastest growing occupations, just in terms of net employment growth, are in the lower wage sector. So that's kind of troubling, I would say. And here, we're seeing building cleaning workers, registered nurses, which is actually, that's got a fairly decent hourly wage of over $32. A lot of the other ones are pretty low until you get to another healthcare, physicians and surgeons, that's very high. And then management analysts, that was interesting. That one's pretty decent as well. But all the other ones are, a lot of them are fairly low. So, and a lot of them are, we've got a lot of healthcare, a lot of retail and service industry, food industry. So that was just a quick snapshot overview. Yep.
Do you have a chart that shows the state and national averages
I don't
for
have
those
it
two?
with me, but yes,
Do you have that?
we could. I do know when you look at it at the state level, I think some retail is at the top as well, and healthcare. Those are some of the. I know registered nurses is for the state. It is if not the top, it's close to the top, and a lot of retail in there as well. So it's not drastically different than what's going on at the state level in terms of the growth, but. So
Carmen?
yes.
Have you done any work looking at if New Hampshire were to change its minimum wage to a livable wage, according to the UNH studies, what kind of impact that would have on businesses?
No, I mean that's a really hard thing to do. We're dealing with the same thing with energy prices. If we could do this, what would happen, and how would companies respond? There's really no. I mean, there are some models that could maybe sort of help answer that question, but it's one of those things where you could survey a company about what would you do if we raised the minimum wage to this, and it's very different to answer that question in a hypothetical versus making a change and then seeing what people actually did, because a lot of if you do a survey that's very hypothetical in nature, those results aren't quite as reliable as actually looking back and seeing. So it's very difficult because we don't really know what would
The
happen.
last study I read out of UNH suggested that the average hourly worker in the valley makes 2/3 what they need to earn
Yeah.
per hour in order to pay their bills.
Yeah.
In other words, 1/3 they go into debt further and further working full-time jobs.
Yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't. That doesn't sound all that surprising to me, unfortunately. So I just wanted to let you know that the tool that we use for this, it's called MZ, and I did talk to Jack about it because we do have the ability, if you wanted to just look more narrowly at the Mount Washington Valley Economic Council region, we could create another region and provide additional data out of this. But I just wanted to show you what we had pulled out for the White Mountains region, since we already had that analysis done, essentially. But you can do a lot of things with it. The economic impact model may be of use to you at some point if you have a project and you want to understand what impact that might have on the economy in terms of the multiplier and other indirect and induced jobs that get created as a result of a project. We can possibly assist with that as well. And I'll just close with another tool that we're working on that should be launched in January is a site selection website. And I just grabbed a couple screenshots for other states. This is Indiana and Michigan. It's a really nice tool that enables us to show to the world all of our commercial properties that are for sale. But then if someone's looking for a certain type of site or building, they can identify ones that meet their criteria, and then they can do a lot of analysis. They can create a 30-minute drive time around this one building that they kind of like, and they can learn about all the labor force characteristics, the other types of businesses within that drive time radius or mile radius. There's a lot of information that some of you might be able to use if you're trying to help a client who's looking at a building for maybe a retail operation, and they want to know what's consumer spending like in this 30-minute drive time. What types of things do people buy? You can actually get that out of it. So when this site is ready in January, we hope. It's just something that it's a public website. It's a free tool that anybody can use. So you could go and log on and you could do whatever kind of analysis you wanted. It's got a lot of data that comes with it, so we hope that it's of use to you. And yeah, I'll just close with that, and if there's any other questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Looking at your report on training grants,
Yes.
I don't see hospitality in there. Is it covered by one of the categories?
Let me check. They do have sales is in here, and I know that there might be some in that. Like I know that we have worked with some hospitality businesses in that regard. But it doesn't look like that's necessarily called out as a category, so it doesn't look like we've had a lot of them.
And the other thing I find missing in the report, or not missing, I'm not sure whether it should be in there, is where does the taxation base come from? In other words, from manufacturing, from hospitality, room and meals tax? What are the relationships to
So statewide?
statewide? And
Yeah. There was a really great study, and I don't have it with me, so I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but it's about a quarter of our state tax revenue comes from the business profits tax and the business enterprise tax. So I don't have the breakdown of which sectors contribute, which chunks of that. We know that rooms and meals tax is huge. That's another big chunk of our state tax revenue. But I could actually, it was in the New Hampshire Business Review, they published this really great look at the state tax structure and how it works and where the money comes from. So that might be, I think it just came out last week.